Good morning. I'm Rebecca Snyder with the Maryland Delaware DC Press Association, and we are holding our session of Into the Newsroom. This time we're speaking with Adam Marton, who is going to share his tips and tricks on data visualization. The precursor to this workshop was Sean Mussenden's talk on using Google Sheets, which is also on our YouTube channel. Adam Marton comes to us from the University of Maryland, where he is a lecturer there focused on visual communications and storytelling. He's led newsrooms for the Baltimore Sun in digital journalism and spans the disciplines of journalism, graphic design, front-end development, and of course, teaching. So Adam, I'll turn it over to you.
Thanks, Rebecca. And thanks to everybody for coming today. I'm really excited to do this. So this is a series of training sessions that we do at Merrill pretty much every semester for our Capitol News Service reporters, sort of giving them a introduction into data journalism and telling stories with data. So this workshop's going to build a little bit on the stuff that Sean Mussenden went over with analyzing data, which is certainly a big part of visualization, but you don't necessarily need to have taken Sean's workshop to appreciate this. So what I'm going to really focus on today is the use of a program called Data Wrapper, which is an off-the-shelf tool that will help you create simple graphs, charts, maps, and data visualizations. As lots of you guys mentioned during the introduction, graphics and data visualizations are a great way to add context and visual interest and interactivity to your stories. They can help draw readers in, as we've seen countless times on what are often the biggest stories of the year from the New York Times and the Washington Post, and really just help you tell stories in a new and interesting visual manner. So like I said, today, for the most part, we're going to focus on Data Wrapper. If we have time, I'll jump into a couple other tools. But Data Wrapper is a free, off-the-shelf, browser-based tool for creating charts, graphs, and maps. Very easy to use. So you can get a free account for your personal use. Oftentimes these days we see news organizations having paid accounts to Data Wrapper. It's similar to some other programs out there, one called Infogram or Chartly or lots of other sort of infographics programs that have been around for a long time, but Data Wrapper is significantly more professional. I would say that it is the first program of its time that really allows you to create these sort of charts, graphs, and maps in a way that's really professional. None of the programs that have come out before really let you make publication ready infographics, but Data Wrapper has has taken care of that and really let you produce things that are suitable for professional publication. There's another program out now called Flourish Studio that has been bought by Google that is also excellent, and also I believe has a free level as well. But what you're seeing happen these days is lots of news organizations sort of using Data Wrapper and sometimes Flourish to really just streamline their infographics production department. So like LA Times really started it when they started using Data Wrapper to produce all of their, charts, graphs, and maps. And when I ran the graphics department at the Baltimore Sun, like 75 to 90% of my time was spent creating simple charts and locator maps and things that it seems like should be really easy to do, but in fact are not, or were not. The Data Wrapper has sort of changed that. And the real benefit is that it allows anyone to create charts, graphs, and maps so that the graphics folks and data visualization folks can spend their time creating more, custom or bespoke visualizations that oftentimes rely on some sort of coding, generally JavaScript. Horace mentioned D3, which is sort of the default JavaScript library for creating graphics. So let's go ahead and jump right in. I'm going to share screen, and I have a presentation I'm just going to go through real quick that'll give you guys sort of an overview of what Data Wrapper does. Okay, so this is a modified version of a deck that Data Wrapper put out. Oh, I'm at the end. That was my problem here. Okay, so how to make charts, maps, tables with Data Wrapper. So this first screen just sort of gives a nice overview of how Data Wrapper works. First thing that we do is we enter some data, the program ingests it, we choose our chart type, it visualizes the chart, and then we, so you can see it's sort of choosing different chart types here. And then once you choose a chart type, you can go through lots of different options to refine it. And we'll go through all these steps in detail here in just a second. Okay, so you can see there's lots of different chart types for Data Wrapper. This is an example of a line chart. Looks really nice and clean, professionally done. We have lots of data in here, but also there's a couple data points that are highlighted to sort of help tell your story, which brings some data right to the top, which is really nice. Here we can see what Data Wrapper does, which is make your data really interactive, right, to let people sort of explore all the different data points. So you can hover over a line, it'll highlight that specific line. You can look at different points, etc. Here we have what's called a stacked bar chart. And so again, we can see the interactivity that Data Wrapper provides, right, where we can see sort of the overall view of the data, but then we can also drill down really specifically into different sections of it. Here's a dot plot, right, that's showing sort of differences in different values. So we can see how different online rating systems have rated different movies and sort of the difference between them. And again, we get the sense of the sort of interactivity that the program provides. Here we see small multiples of basically pie charts. These are called Doughnut Charts. There's really no difference between a pie chart and a donut chart, just the hole in the middle. Right, but here we see, right, what's called small multiples. So we get a number of donut charts placed next to each other. So not only do we get a view of each country, but we can also look at each country sort of in relation to the other. It's a nice way to sort of use multiple graphics together. Here's a scatter plot, which is nice. And I think most people hate scatter plots. They're sort of difficult to get your head around at first. This is a really nice one. And there's some nice design going on in this. Certainly the colors do a lot for it. But what we're looking at here is life expectancy in relation to GDP per capita. So we see life expectancy on the left axis and GDP on the bottom axis. We can see that, what we're seeing in this trend here, we can see sort of a line going from the bottom left up to the top right, which is generally what you want to see in a scatter plot if you're trying to tell a story. Some sort of trends traveling one way or another. So what this is telling us is that in general, life expectancy goes up as GDP goes up, which is interesting. But what this graphic also does really well is it adds a couple other data points to tell a much richer story. We have the colors, right, which break down each country by continent. So that adds a little bit of context. And also we're using size, which is not obvious because we're not seeing the sort of small print on this graphic, but what the size is telling us is actually the total population of those countries. So that just adds a couple more data points that lets us explore the data a little bit further. Lots of map choices in Data Wrapper. I'll show you guys how to make a few of these. Chloroplast maps, which are really popular in news. So what we see with the Chloroplast map is some sort of geographic area. Geographic areas cut up here. This is counties in the US. Sometimes we see legislative districts or zip codes or states or countries. And the geographic areas are color coded to indicate some sort of value. Generally, darker means like a greater value. Here we're seeing income level in the US by county. One great thing about Data Wrapper is it comes with all these maps already included, what they're calling administrative boundaries. And this, making a Chloroplast map like this, I used to do them for Baltimore and for Maryland all the time. It would take hours or days. Certainly doing it in code, you'd have to find shape files and then write JavaScript to communicate with those shape files and then write more JavaScript to communicate with the data to bring it all together. And with Data Wrapper, you can do it in literally minutes. They say they have over 1,000 of these administrative boundaries. I'll show you guys when we make one, how many they have for Maryland, which is really quite lovely. So you can also, if they don't have a map that you want to use, you can upload your own shapefile in a GeoJSON format, which is nice. I also have these symbol maps, which again, we can take advantage of color and size to sort of indicate different things about geographic locations. If we have time, I'll show you how to make one of these. And you can also make locator maps. And again, these are probably the most popular kind of news graphic where you're saying, hey, this is where this news event happened. I used to make these every day at the Sun, and they were really time consuming, right? You'd have to use some sort of professional cartography software like ArcGIS, define your area, and then bring that into Adobe Illustrator and style it. So again, a locator map might have taken 2 or 3 hours in the past, and now you could, I mean, we'll do one in like 5 minutes in Data Wrapper. Here's sort of the process to go through adding a location. I'll show you guys that in person. There's also lots of table options in Data Wrapper. I won't go through too many of those today, but tables are nice ways to sort of display raw data in a way that's pretty easy for people to get their heads around. Data Wrapper also lets you add other types of graphics inside the table, which is kind of cool. So once you make your graphic in Data Wrapper, you can export it in lots of different ways. The best way is going to be as code. I'll show you guys that. But you can also export it as a PDF or as some other sort of static graphic file like a PNG or SVG. And there's lots of resources beyond this video for how to use Data Wrapper. There's a Data Wrapper Academy where they'll show you how to make all kinds of different charts. There's also help directly in each screen, as we'll see. There's a nice Data Wrapper blog called Chartable that they teach you how to make different types of more complex graphics. And there's also something called the River that's just like this sort of flowing view of charts as people make them, which is a good place to go for inspiration. You know, one thing I can't do in a, you know, I'm going to show you guys how to hit the right buttons to make graphics in Data Wrapper, but there's a lot more to making graphics, right? There's certainly like understanding how to choose the right kind of graphic for the data that you have. There's infographics theory, lots of concepts behind them. So to learn more about that, I really suggest, you know, a couple great books. Certainly Alberto Cairo is the sort of guru in this area of infographics and journalism, and he's written a couple wonderful books, including The Truthful Art, newish book from Jonathan Swabish called Better Data Visualizations, and Donna Wong's Wall Street Journal Guide to Infographics is sort of the AP style guide of infographics. You'll see that on everybody's desk. So let's go ahead and jump right in. So like I said, you guys can get free accounts to Data Wrapper. I have, you know, usually this is like a 2-hour, 2.5 hour workshop. So I would pause and have people run through exercises. The way I suggest doing it is just watching me, and I'm going to share some exercises at the end that you guys can sort of try out yourself at home with some raw data and free Data Wrapper accounts. Okay, I think the best way to do to get the way to get the most out of this workshop is sort of watch right now and try later. Okay. So if you see me looking away, the reason is because I have a second screen, not doing other work. I'm just sort of referencing some different notes that I have, and I'll be pulling up some different things. Okay, so let's close this. So right now what I have open is Data Wrapper, and then I just have like a bunch of data that we're going to use to make different graphics here today. Okay, so the first thing we want to do is go to our dashboard in Data Wrapper. It'll show you all the graphics that you've made in the past. These are just different graphics that we've made for CNS at the University of Maryland. So we're just going to start out by making a really simple bar chart. And to do that, we're going to click on New Chart. And the first thing you always have to do, oh, and I wanted to say, if anybody has questions, just shout. I sort of have you up on my second screen, but I really won't be able to see you if you raise your hand. So feel free to just shout out and interrupt me. That's definitely completely fine. Okay, so the first thing you always have to do when you're making a graphic is to import the data. So what we're going to look at right now is data about, let's see what we want to look at, states with the most COVID-19 cases. And all the data that we're going to look at today was actually pulled like in the beginning of the year around January 5th. So this isn't current data, but it will certainly serve our purposes today. So here we have a little bit of data that I pulled from the New York Times COVID database, which is quite wonderful and has been kept up. And I believe they just won a Pulitzer Prize for it. So what we see is every state, their cases, their COVID cases as of 1/5/21, and the number of deaths as of 1/5/21. And what I did was I pulled population estimates for each state, and created cases per 1,000 people and deaths per 1,000 people. That's really easy to do, right? A really simple formula. We just divide cases by population and times that by 1,000 to get cases per 1,000, and to get deaths per 1,000. We do deaths divided by population times 1,000. And so the reason we're doing that is to put this, to normalize the data, to put it in context. Like, number of cases doesn't really mean anything. Number of deaths doesn't really mean anything when we're looking at these areas that are totally different in size and population. What you're really going to see if you just looked at cases or just looked at deaths was the size of the population, most likely. But once we normalize it, we'll get a much better understanding of the data. So we can look at cases per 1,000 people, and we can see that North Dakota and South Dakota have the most cases per 1,000 people, or did at the beginning of the year. But if we just looked at cases, right, we'd be seeing, right, these are the states with the biggest population. So, so it's always a good idea to normalize things. So what I've done is I've truncated this data a little bit. Like, Data Wrapper doesn't want all of this data. All it wants is exactly what we're going to visualize, which is the state, the cases, and the deaths per 1,000 people. And I'm just going to make a chart that looks at the top 10 based on cases. So what I'm going to do is just copy this data right out of my spreadsheet here. And you could use, I'm in Sheets, you could use Excel, it doesn't really matter. So I'm just going to copy that. I'm just going to paste it right into Data Wrapper, and it looks a little funky at first. And I will click Proceed. Now it's going to take a minute for Data Wrapper to sort of ingest this data, but it's going to spit a table back at me, basically just to check, is this right? And it looks right. I'll spot check a couple real quick. Kansas. Yep, looks good. So we'll just say, okay, thank you. Go ahead and proceed. And our next step is going to be to choose what kind of graphic we want. And it's going to start out with a line chart, which is not great in this case. We can click around. This is one thing I love about Data Wrapper, is we can check out all kinds of different chart types just to see, just to sort of play around with the data in a really sort of low stakes manner. I think, you know, this stacked bars might be okay. What we're seeing here is cases and then deaths. One problem we're going to have with this data is that, like, there are so many more cases than there are deaths, right? So this is okay. I would say this isn't perfect, because what we're, you know, when you do a stacked bar like this, you're kind of implying that these two factors are parts of a whole, which they're really not, right? Cases and deaths don't come together to equal like a whole of something. So what I think is actually better is to do these split bars that show cases in one bar and deaths in another bar, sort of separated. So we're not implying any sort of real, we're not implying that they're parts of a greater whole. So that's what we'll go with, and we'll click Proceed, where now Data Wrapper is going to let it like change whatever we want to really make this match our vision. So I'll just go over a couple of the options here, right? We can change the alignment of the, you can see that, change the alignment of the labels, which I think I do want to right align them because it gives a nice little line right there. We could also change the values, which I don't, you know, we could do that. I don't think it really matters that much. You can always change the format of the numbers. So I think this is probably good. But one second, I get my notes together here. Sorry, slight little technical glitch there. For the number format, right, maybe we don't want to display the decimals. Maybe it's a percentage. Maybe we want to show it in hundreds of thousands. In this case, I think just leaving it at thousands is probably fine. Let's see. We could change the values of our horizontal axes. We don't want to do that here, but certainly sometimes for line charts, that's necessary. We can change the color, which is really nice. Data Wrapper has some sort of off-the-shelf colors, and we can just choose one of these default colors and it'll change it for us. We can also choose from different color ramps and it'll change things based on that, which is nice. But what we can also do is we can customize the colors, which is pretty great. So if your publication has like a style guide, we can change based on your style guide. For instance, here we'll pull up like this is the Pantone color of the year from 2020 is this classic blue, they call it. The 2021 color of the year is like gray, which would not be great for this infographic, though I think I do understand why they chose it. So we'll go with this blue, if I can find the hex code for it somewhere here. Okay, so the hex code, which is just HTML code that indicates color. You can see there's lots of different ways you can indicate color, CMYK, RGB. For the web, we use what's called a hex code, which is just the 6-digit/number hexadecimal code, and it's OF4C81. So we can choose our bar and just put that in. Color. So it's O84C81, close enough. And so now it changes it to that default color. We could change the other one too. We can also change our sort of title over top here, like maybe we wanted to say cases per 1,000 people with a comma. We could change that. And that's going to change our legend up there. We'd probably want to do that on both of them. So we can decide if we want to have our legend. I think in this case, we probably do. We can make the bars thicker. We can do separating lines. We can do a bar background. We do what's called mirroring bars, which I don't think we do want to do, right? But I think that every one of those options added a little bit visually to this. So there's lots of things we can do to sort of increase things. We could also decide we wanted to sort bars instead of by cases, by deaths, which would be fine. We could also reverse the order of the sort, or if we had a column that we wanted to group by, we could do that. But in general, I'm pretty happy with the way this looks. I think it's come out nice. So what we want to do now is add in some annotation. And this is really important. I think that, this is something that you really have to learn. And I'm guessing a lot of you are writers, so this shouldn't be too difficult for you. But what we call the headline and the chatter, here they're calling it the title and the description for news graphics, is incredibly important. This is our opportunity to do two things. The first thing that we want to do is let people know exactly what they are looking at here, right? Like there's no guessing in infographics. It's really important that we are very descriptive about exactly what this data is and exactly what we're showing. And then once we do that, we also have an opportunity to sort of tell a story, to interpret the data a little bit for people. So, Alberto Cairo says the difference between an infographic and a data visualization is that in an infographic, we tell a story, and in a data visualization, the users sort of figure out the story themselves. So, what we're making here are infographics. We want to help people sort of interpret this data a little bit if we can and help tell a story, because ultimately this is going to be put in context with a news story, right? And the object of this infographic should be to help tell that story, just like a good photograph, a good piece of photojournalism helps tell the story a little bit more visually. Infographics sort of follow that same idea. Okay, so I'm going to use a headline here that's just really descriptive, that tells people exactly what this data is, right? So US states with the most COVID-19 cases by population. So boom, short and simple, that's what you're looking at here, cases by population, also deaths by population, right? But that's sort of our secondary value since we're sorting by cases. And I'm gonna use the chatter in this case, to help interpret the data a little bit for people. So North Dakota and South Dakota led the United States in COVID-19 cases per 1,000 people as of January 5th, 2021. New Jersey and New York, which are not shown, of course, because we're only showing the top 10, and they don't fall in the top 10 for cases, lead the country in deaths per 1,000 people. So very descriptive headline, help tell the story a little bit with the chatter. It's a nice way to go. You can also switch that, which is totally fine. You'll notice I'm doing a couple things in my chatter. I'm getting that date out there, like because this data changes every single day, right? This is literally a very small snapshot in time. So it's important to let people know not just what the data is, but sort of the confines of the data. And I'm also getting across that this is normalized data. We're looking at it per 1,000 people. So I'm going to use what they call the note feature here to once again tell people, hey, this is current as of January 5th, 2021. I just really want to get that idea across. I can put it in my byline here. And every infographic you ever published absolutely has to have a source, and you want to be really thorough about that source. Sometimes they're going to be multiple sources. So in this case, I got this data from the New York Times COVID data, which I'm also going to put in a link to here. which is just a nice thing so people can actually look at the data themselves. And you can see it here. This is their GitHub repo that has all the data. It's still up to date. It's really quite lovely. But so what I've said is data collected by the New York Times, right? But where did the Times get this data? So they got it, if we read through their GitHub repo, they got it from reports from state and local health agencies and hospitals, right? So I'm actually going a couple levels with the source data to let people know exactly where how this data was collected. And that's not really all the places that this data came from, because I also normalized it with the population data, which I got from the census, right? So I'm just adding as much info in the source as I can, which is just a really important way for us as journalists to be transparent. So that's it, right? I think this is a really nice graphic. We're going to go ahead and click proceed. There's a screen called layout that I really don't ever use at all. There is we can click social media buttons here, which will add the share button, which is actually pretty nice. But other than that, I don't do much on this screen generally. And now we get to our publish screen, so I can publish our chart. And this is going to give me a bunch of options, right? It's going to give me like a share link, which doesn't really do much, just gives you a, if you needed to send this to your editor in an easy way or share it with your mom, it's a good way to do it. But you can't really publish with that link. The way to publish is with this embed code here, which is just an HTML code that you can throw right directly into an online news story. It plays well with every CMS I've ever worked with, works great with WordPress. I generally use this responsive iframe embed code. There's also a non-responsive iframe if for some reason the responsive one doesn't play well with your CMS. But then there's also these other, you can also download it as a static image, as a PNG, or sometimes it's an SVG as well. And you can choose different, the size if you want a static image. You're going to lose a lot with a static image because it's not going to be interactive. You're not going to be able to hover and see different values. So when you can, always use that responsive iframe. So that's a full graphic and data wrapper. Anybody have questions before I move on? All right, awesome. Let's do another one. Let's make a quick line chart now. And what we'll look at for our line chart is some data about, let's see here. Cases by month, I would say. Okay. So what we see here are cases in the US, cases and deaths in the US at the end of every month in 2020. And you can see this data is pretty striking, right? It goes from 7 deaths or 7 cases up to over 2 million. Anyway, some very high number of cases and deaths. And we see it increasing exponentially every month. So it's really pretty striking. So this will make a good line chart. So again, I'll just copy and paste the data right into data wrapper and go ahead and ingest it. Okay, that looks right to me. Go ahead and proceed. And so again, this is going to start us out with a line chart, which off the shelf doesn't look that great, but we can change that. Again, it's always fun to sort of click around and see some other ways that you might be able to visualize this data. But I'm not seeing a lot of great ones, maybe an area chart, but I think in this case, probably a line chart is best. This is not really ideal data. In fact, if somebody handed me this in the real world, I'm not sure I'd do a line chart. I might actually visualize this as 2 totally separate charts. And you can see why. It's because cases so badly outrank deaths, it makes the deaths line look kind of flat. Whereas in fact, if we look at the data, the deaths go from like 1 to over 300,000 in the course of a year. So that's really not insignificant, but the cases go so high that it sort of dwarfs that line. But for our purposes today, this is good data to work with. Just something to keep in mind that sometimes when you visualize something together, you're like, oh, well, this isn't exactly telling the story that I wanted to tell. So is there a better way to do it? Okay. So we're gonna, so we can select what column we want our horizontal axis to be. In this case, we do want it to be, for this one down here, we do want it to be date. I'm going to change the format to show, so right now it's just, you can see the format it's in right now. I'm going to change it to this, so it didn't really change much, but so you can see we could We could just show months. We could change it to all kinds of weird stuff. I think that this is probably, no, that's not great. Maybe we'll go back to, there we go. So we're seeing that it goes, you know, through 2020. And the reason it's showing February and January is because if we look at our data, it's actually, we're showing like the last day of the month. So it's, to plot that, it's saying, hey, this is pretty much January, pretty much February. Okay, so we can show or hide grid lines. I think we'll just keep them hidden in this case. Don't think there's too much we want to change, you know, for number formats. Again, we could change things. We could put them in the, you know, so it shows sort of a truncated version of the number. I think we'll just keep it the full number. It's a little bit more impactful. I will make this graph a little bit higher, increase the height a little bit, maybe not that much. Oops. There we go. Okay, that just lets us see our deaths line a little bit more. Okay, so I want to customize the lines a little bit if I can. So we can do, you know, we can certainly customize the colors again. We'll just choose one of these off the shelf data wrapper colors this time. Maybe we'll go with the green. But again, we could change them by hand if we wanted to. We can also make the lines thicker. Maybe we'll go ahead and do that. We could also make them dotted or dashed if we wanted, but I don't think we'll do that. So we can change the way that the line is being displayed. We can make it curved, which in a lot of times it makes a lot of sense. I'm not sure it does this time. But you know, in general, the way things move is in more of like a curved manner as opposed to more of like a straight line between dots. Oftentimes things you know, change in more of a curve. And we'll see that a little bit more closely in maybe one of the next examples. And so let's just quickly get this one out here. So what else do we want to change to sort of make this one interesting? So we can change our, we'll look at some advanced options. So we could customize the tooltips. So I want to, I don't think actually we need to change much here. I just want to change the way the date's being displayed just to make it a little bit more obvious. And I can customize the line symbols. This will actually do a lot for us, right? So one great thing about Data Wrapper is we can click on every single point of data and we can see what data is at that point. And we can visualize, we can give people a visual clue that that exists by putting like a shape on every point. In this case, like a, and it's not really cooperating with me. I'm going to refresh this just because it's not responding to some things I'm telling it to do here. There we go. Okay. So so if anything ever starts hanging on you, just hit refresh. It often fixes it. So anyway, we've got a little visual indicator now that like there's a piece of data at every one of those dots, and I think that is useful. We can also fill the space between the lines to say, hey, there's some sort of relation between these two lines, which in this case there is, right? These are sort of related because they're both about COVID. So yeah, so I think, you know, we've greatly improved the look of this just by clicking a couple buttons here. Now let's go ahead and annotate it. Okay, let's see. So for this, I'm actually going to tell my story a little bit in the headline. So what I'm going to say is, so COVID-19 cases and deaths increased steadily in the United States throughout 2020, right? So cases and deaths have gone up. This is what you're seeing. And then we'll use the chatter to sort of let people know what they're looking at and take that story a little bit further, right? So at the end of February 2020, the United States reported 70 cases and 1 death. Cases increased to over 6 million by the end of August, over 183,000 deaths by the end of the year, over 20 million cases and 346,000 deaths, right? So we're basically like, hey, if you don't actually want to play around with this graphic, this is exactly what it's telling you. And that, you know, is, I think, can be really useful, right? Not making people work to figure out what this data is telling them. So again, I want to put in my source, always very important. It's the same source as the last data. Put in my source link. I could add a byline, and there we go. We're pretty much done with that one. So for time's sake here, because I really want to get into maps, I want to show you guys how you could make like a much more interesting data wrapper graphic, right? So, you know, what we've done so far is we've made like some really, really simple line charts. What we have here, line charts and bar charts, what we have here is something much more complex, right? Which, so we can see this data, it's COVID-19 cases by day in countries all over the world, right? So we have a number of countries all over the world, major countries. And what we've done, what we have is data for every day, the number of cases per day. And this is pulled directly from the Johns Hopkins, Johns Hopkins is the other major source for COVID data besides the New York Times. This is pulled from a live link from their data. So you can see, let's close some of this stuff out here. You can see what we've done for the data source here is instead of copying and pasting the data, I actually have like a link to a CSV file. So this would update every day all by itself. And so, you know, we have just a tremendous amount of data here, right? Over a year's worth of data for all these different countries. And we've done a couple things to make this more interesting. One thing we did is we basically didn't put like a much of a title or a description in it. What we've done is we've used what are called text annotations, right? So we have an annotation where we were able to draw a little square somewhere on the graphic. And this is just a way, like in this case, it's more visually interesting to put the headline here where we had this big white space. So we put our headline there with an annotation. And then we've split up the different lines by country and by continent. Let me show you guys how we did that. This is really what I think a really fascinating way to use the sort of graphic design fundamentals like alignment and using things that are close to each other, right? And color to sort of communicate visually what this graphic's all about. So we customized the colors. And basically what we did was we chose a color palette for each continent, right? And we did a different color within, you know, a different shade of that color. So for, you know, for Asia, we have these reds and each color gets a different shade of red. For Europe, we used blue and every color gets a different shade of that blue, and so on, right? South America is green. And so that visually groups all of those countries together, right? But also separates them from each other because it's a slightly different shade. And then we used the text annotations to actually put just a text label over the groupings of different continents to make it a little bit easier for people to understand what they're doing. And then of course I highlighted the US because we're assuming this is going to be seen as in a US publication. So you can explore through this and just get a tremendous amount of data out of this graphic, and it's pulling it in a live way, so it would update itself every single day, right? So you can do really simple examples, but you can also, once you get your head around the tools in Data Wrapper, you can do stuff that's just much, much more complex. Okay, so let's switch over to maps now. So first I'd like to make one of these Chloroplast maps, which again, I think is just really exciting. Like I love maps like this. My portfolio just has tons of them, and it used to just be so arduous to make maps like this. It would take forever, and we'll throw one together in like 5 minutes here. So you can see there's lots of different shapes already provided. You can just choose, and Data Wrapper will give it to you. So let's just search by Maryland, and we'll get a feeling of what they give you for Maryland. And this is pretty exciting, I think. You know, we can make a map by census tracts, by legislative districts, zip codes, ZICTAs, census tracts, counties, district courts, congressional districts, state legislative districts, upper and lower, right? So there's just so much you can do with this, depending on what you're trying to visualize. For, you know, you just click on one and it'll automatically break up the shapes for you. I will say Data Wrapper is like a Dutch company, so they don't always get everything right, but they're very quick to respond. I think there's like here's one where they have zip codes. Oh, they must have gotten rid of the old one. Well, they had zip codes again, here's their zip codes 2020. We were using the zip codes, the ZICTAs, and they like totally had it wrong. They had a bunch that were in like DC and Virginia, and we emailed them. See, you might even be able to see it on the map. And they fixed it like the very next day and put it together a new shape for us to use. So you do sometimes have to be careful, just because, you know, with them bringing in over 1,000 administrative districts, like mistakes can get made. But I found them to be a really great company to work with. So anyway, we're going to work with counties here, and we're going to make a little visualization looking at COVID cases by county in Maryland. So let's see what we got here. So here's my county's full data. I did the same thing as we did with states, right? I've got all the counties in Maryland, confirmed cases, confirmed deaths, and then I normalized it with population numbers. So I got cases per 1,000 and deaths per 1,000, just with a really quick little formula there. And we can see at this time that this was during a period where Western Maryland counties were having a big increase in COVID cases. So we're seeing like Allegheny County having the most cases, and Allegheny County also having the most deaths, which was pretty unusual. It was PG County, Baltimore City for most of the pandemic. Anyway, so I truncated this data. So I pulled out, again, Data Wrapper doesn't want your calculations and all these extra fields. So what I did was I truncated the data just down to what Data Wrapper wants, or basically what I'm trying to visualize, which is cases per 1,000 people and deaths per 1,000 people. So let's take a look at this, because we have to be a little bit more careful with how we put our data in. So, you know, one way we could do this is we could do this by hand. We could type in the different values, we could add more columns, etc. But that would take a long time, because I'm always amazed at just how many counties there are in our small little state. So what we're going to do is we're going to copy and paste. But what we have to make sure of is that our county list over here that we're going to copy and paste from is in the exact same order as the county list here, which you would think is easy because it's just alphabetized. But Baltimore City will often throw you off, because sometimes Baltimore City will just be called Baltimore. You know, Baltimore City, Baltimore County will sometimes throw off alphabetization of counties in Maryland. So you just have to be careful that you're in the same order. And a quick spot check will make sure that you're doing it right. So anyway, I'm just going to select my data. In this case, we don't want to pull in our headers. So I'm just going to paste this. And again, I'm just going to do a spot check, like, okay, so Allegheny 76.5, Carroll 3219. Let's look at Howard 3697. They were looking good. Let's go down to the bottom. Comico 792. Yeah. So so I don't want to publish data that's wrong. In fact, like, people have lost their jobs for publishing data that's wrong. So I'll always check data. In fact, if I wasn't trying to do this carefully, I would be even more carefully checking the data to make sure that things were correct. It's just, it's part of our SPJ ethics to make sure that we're publishing things that are true and correct. Okay, so let's proceed. And man, this is awesome. Look at, Data Wrapper just popped this map out from that data that we put in. It went ahead and added values for us. You can see right now let's go back and look at how it ingested this data real quick. So we're gonna so it isn't using my column header. So we're just gonna have to remember, like, it's calling the county column ID, it's calling cases per 1,000 people value and deaths per 1,000 people C, which is not ideal, but I've never found a way to change the names of these headers unless you wanted to upload your data in a slightly different way. So anyway, just keep that in mind, these column names, right? Counties is ID, cases is value, and deaths is C, because that's going to become important. So here's our map. You can see it's selecting the column to assign colors to its value, which was cases. We could also do it by deaths, and it would just create, it would just visualize it slightly differently. We'll stick with cases. It's got a color palette for us. We could change that. I'm going to go ahead and stick with the default one. One thing to keep in mind when creating a color ramp, what we call it here, is like, the way that we as human beings interpret color is that the darker colors are for a higher value, right? If you swap these and your darker colors were for a lower value, it's gonna be really tough for people to quickly visually understand your graphic. And I'll just stop here real quick to talk about how important it is for people to be able to quickly understand your graphic. When you're making like complex data visualizations, it's okay to have the expectation that people are gonna spend a little bit of time with your graphic. When you're making charts and graphs and maps, like your main goal should be communicating the data really quickly and easily. In fact, in a professional newsroom, we'll often iterate through several different versions of a graphic, put them in front of, take a look at them together. And bar none, what we always go for is, which one of these graphics can I understand the quickest, right? Because people, especially when they're reading a news story, like they're not necessarily here to look at your beautiful graphics and spend a lot of time interpreting them. They want to get the data, get the information, and move on with the story. Okay, so lecture over on that one. So let's take a look at some of the options that we have with this Chloroplast map. So I'm going to keep that color palette. I'm going to change this to steps. So instead of, you can just see, instead of it using this linear interpolation of the data, I'm going to sort of step it from value to value. We can change the number of steps. And in fact, with our color palette, if we click this, we can change the steps on our color ramp as well and add in more stops where it would that can correspond nicely with your steps. Each of these color stops corresponds with a stop in the interpretation of the data. We can also change the range of our data interpretation, but we don't really want to do that in this case. Like, data wrapper took the minimum value, which is 26, and the maximum value, and it put 5 steps in between it, and that's pretty great. That's exactly what we want. So do we want to show a color legend here? We do, but I don't really want to show it up here, right? The one thing about making maps of Maryland is you've got this big old white space right here. You're always going to have it. So ideally, we put our legend down there in the bottom left, and we can change I want to change a couple other things here. I want to make this ranges instead of values, and I want to try to stack these on top of each other if I can remember how to do that. Here we go. So this is just a better looking legend, and I think it's easier for people to understand. So it really shows you precisely what each color is showing. And I can offset this a little bit now to put it exactly where I want it in this graphic. There we go. Great. Now it's just taking up a nice little space in my big white space there, and underneath Western Maryland. Okay, so I'm going to change the way this data is interpreted just a little bit. I'm not going to get too much into how the data is interpreted. It's just like how it's looking at the values. I think this is a little bit more accurate to look at the values that way. All right, so I'm pretty happy with this. We could make the map zoomable. I don't want to do that. There's no reason you would have to zoom in on this. The one other thing I want to change, I want to make nice tooltips. I want to make nice tooltips, because whatever, right now, you hover over it, it's giving you a tooltip, but that number is completely devoid of context. We can do that and annotate. We can customize our tooltips, right? And so this gets a little bit into the world of coding, right? So you can see right now, it's using those column headers to dynamically show values of out of our database or out of our data table. So the top value it's showing is the ID, which is our county. So it's dynamically pulling in the county name. And then it's showing the value column, which, if you remember, is cases per 1,000 people. So I can type in some plain English here and would make this 1,000 times better. So I'm going to say cases per 1,000 people equals, right? And so now we've added a little bit of context, and that's really what we're visualizing. So that's great. I can also add in other dynamic values from our data table if I want. For instance, we had our C value, which was deaths per 1,000 people. And so now it's pulling in that second number, which I can call deaths per 1,000 people. And I can use a little bit of HTML. I'll just use a break tag, which just puts a a line break in between those two. So now we've got a really nice tooltip, right, that lets people explore this data a little bit. So now we'll just throw in some headline and chatter, and this one will be good to go. So here we're looking at COVID-19 cases in Maryland, counties by population, right? Again, very descriptive headline. This is exactly what you're looking at. And then I'll tell the story a little bit, because especially during this time when this data was pooled, it was very interesting that like these fairly low population Western Maryland counties had so many cases. Allegheny County has the most confirmed COVID-19 cases and deaths in Maryland by population, et cetera, right? And we'll add in our note about when the data is current through, add in our source link. Here we have another really nice graphic. Okay, that's a Chloroplast map. So, so I think we have till 10:45. Is that true, Rebecca?
Yes.
Yes. Okay, great. All right, I'm gonna keep going then. And actually, I need to plug in my computer, so give me half a second to do that. All right, so 15 minutes. I can show you guys a couple more things here. Let's go ahead and do a locator map, because I think, like I said, I think that is probably the most common type of news map that's ever done, and certainly very simple. So these are so easy to make. We'll just like throw a quick one together. So we can, Data Wrapper will find a place based on sort of a generic name. We could type in like Wuhan, and it would find you know, Wuhan, China, and that's enough. It would add the marker. Did it do it? Let's refresh. Actually, let's do University of Maryland. See if it can find that for us. Let's try this one. Okay, so there's the University of Maryland, right? But we can also, I'm gonna go ahead and delete that one. We can also type in an address, or we can type in something a little bit more generic and it will find that too. In this case, let's find Knight Hall, which is the building where the journalism college is in the University of Maryland. Let's see if we can find it here. Yeah, it's so funny. I've done this one like a million times and it's never had a problem.
You passed it. It was at the top.
Did I? Okay. Oh, great. All right. Thank you. Okay, there it is. So Knight Hall, University of Maryland. So we'll just go ahead and now we can zoom in and define our view, and we can decide sort of what we want to show. I don't want to show that whole address. I just want it to say Knight Hall. We can make it a circle or a square. We can give it a place name or a text box. So I'll keep that. Let's do a star. Let's make it blue. And then we can add a tooltip, and I'll just add the address to the tooltip. We can change the scale, make it bigger. We can rotate it around if you were trying to insert several of them and needed to do that. We can also, like, let's say we wanted to define this like in, like this is in PG County, we could maybe once. Let's see if it'll just give me some options. All right, let's skip that one. That is not working right now. So here's some other interesting things we can do with this. If we click proceed, so we can choose like our map styles. Maybe we want it to be gray or light. What is really cool, especially since we're on a college campus, is we can, we can label the buildings. We can choose like what we want to display on the map. For instance, like, do we want to show buildings? Do we want to show buildings? Do we want to show the roads or not the roads? So, like in when we would make a map showing where a crime occurred, the idea is like, what's the least amount you can show and still have people understand where this happened, right? So you'd want to sort of strip out everything you can, but also include enough that like it gives real context so people can understand, because too much is just noise and too little and people can't locate it. So that's why you have all these options. But what I really like here is we can show 3D buildings, right? And then we can start rotating it a little bit. Or no, sorry, tilt is what we want here. Oh God, I love this so much. All right, let's zoom in. Now it's like we're on campus, right? Here's where Knight Hall is on campus, and you can actually like walk around campus a little bit, and it really looks like it, right? I love this 3D building stuff. Let's go ahead and get rid of the buildings and take our tilt back to 0, and I'll show you guys how to. So let's go back one, and let's add another location. Like let's add the Baltimore Sun building. No, that's not the building anymore. All right, Cromwell Street is where they are now. And, we can add in, maybe we want to do a different symbol for the sun. Do that thing, and we'll make it the same blue. And we'll get rid of all this. Add it as a tooltip again. And now we've got 2 locations, and we can sort of define, so you can add lots of different locations on this map to give a little bit of context. And etc. Right? So these locator maps are really easy to use, and there's lots you can do. So, one other type of map that I often show, but we're kind of running out of time here, is what's called a symbol map, which is very easy to do with data wrapper. And what we've done here is we've added, so let's look at the data for this first. We've got, this is COVID top countries with the most cases of COVID-19, but again, this was like 6 or 7 months ago. Andorra, which I don't know if you guys know this. I didn't know about Andorra. It's like a country near France I believe in the Pyrenees Mountains. So very small country, but had the most cases at this time. So anyway, I've just got this data. I pulled it right from CNN, cases per 1,000 and deaths per 1,000. So with, oops, let's see if we can. So the same way that we added the locations on the locator map, just by adding a point, I was able to add in these different countries, and then I added a column and included the cases and the deaths. And then to visualize it, this is really fascinating way to visualize, because like in the examples we looked at earlier, you can use color and you can use size. So this is actually like showing so we can see down here is Panama, and you can see they have much fewer, they're still in the top 10, but they have much fewer than say the US. So their dot is smaller. If we had something else we wanted to visualize by, we could also use color. So there's symbol color, there's symbol size, and we're just choosing a column to visualize by. So no, this is kind of like a locator map, but it's called a symbol map, and you can do a lot more things, right? You can add different dimensions of data visualization to it. So this is another one to play with. That's really interesting. Does anybody have questions before I do? We have 5 minutes. I can show you guys one more thing, but I'd love to answer questions if anybody has them before we, that might be a better use of the time. If anybody has them, stop sharing for a minute just in case.
Adam, I think I might like to pop in with one if that's cool.
Hey, Horace, what's up?
Yeah, so toward the beginning, you mentioned how there had been other kind of graphics programs in the past that sort of had some of the same features as Data Wrapper, but you wouldn't quite necessarily consider publication ready working with those. So what kind of criteria would you say that Data Wrapper brings to the table that some of those earlier programs didn't?
Yeah, so first it's non-branded, right? So it doesn't say doesn't have a big Data Wrapper logo at the bottom that it includes in its embeds, which almost all of the other ones did, which just it just doesn't really match with your publication styles to have this big logo in the bottom. But more than that, it's all the customization options, right? So the fact that you can completely customize this, not certainly the styles are a big part of it. You can match your publication styles with color and line width and font and all that kind of stuff. But then also just all the customization options for visualization, right? So most of those other programs didn't let you drill down as deep and change different options in the way that Data Wrapper and that Flourish do. And it's really interesting that, you see like 538 uses Data Wrapper now, which is like unheard of. I mean, that's like the 538 is probably the one of the highest end visualization websites out there. Same with Financial Times. I would say they're another really high end visualization site, also using Data Wrapper. And they're working with Data Wrapper, and Flourish does the same thing, and paying, let's say they'll pay like, I'm just throwing out a number, $50,000 a year to have like a branded version of Data Wrapper or Flourish, where their fonts and their colors are built right into a template. So every single graphic that they put out is immediately in their style guide. And if there's something that they want to do that Data Wrapper or Flourish doesn't do, they have a team of developers that'll work with them to figure out how to do it and things like that. Another reason, that the LA Times, for instance, has been able to use Data Wrapper creating graphics online is one thing. You generally do it with code. Creating graphics for print is a totally different discipline, because you have to make vector graphics, generally using Adobe Illustrator or professional cartography programs. So LA Times was really a leader in figuring out how to use Data Wrapper to streamline their print publication of their infographics, where they made the initial graphic in Data Wrapper, exported it as an SVG, a scalable vector graphic, opened that in Illustrator, made a couple quick changes to match styles, and then pushed it to their newspaper, which is kind of brilliant as we see publications going towards more of like an online model these days.
All right, cool. Thank you.
Yes, sir. Anybody else? All right, in that case, let me show you guys one more quick thing. So Night Labs, let's see if I can pull up, got some links here. Well, let me show, I want to share, let's do this real quick. So I'm going to share a link with you guys in the chat that, this is to a Google Doc, and this is going to have some links, right? It's got a link to Data Wrapper. It has a link to a couple exercises, how to make a chart, to let you guys practice making charts and maps. And it has all of the data that you would need included. If you have any problem opening up any of these docs, just ping me or request access. They should all be public. It also has the slides that I showed today, a video that shows how to do exactly what I just showed you guys, and also a video of how to use these Night Lab tools that I'm going to show you right now. Okay, so this is just some links that should be useful to you, and also these exercises will allow you to practice this stuff, which I think is important. If you took 5 minutes and practice this today, you would remember how to do it sort of for forever. Okay, so let's look at Night Lab. Where did I do my notes here? Here we go. This is what I want. Okay, so first we'll look at this program called Timeline JS, which lets you make these really beautiful timelines, JavaScript-based timelines, just based on a spreadsheet. I'm not going to go through how to do it because they have a 2-minute video which shows how to do it. You download a default spreadsheet from Timeline, you change some things, and then you can publish your own timeline. We used to do this at the Sun all the time, and we just taught reporters how to do it or editors how to do it. Takes literally zero technical skills at all. This is an example of a example timeline that I made about like key moments in the 2020 pandemic in the US, right? So each moment along the timeline is a slide. You include headline and chatter, and you can include photos or embedded video or graphics or maps. And it's just like, here's a YouTube video. It's just like a really nice way to sort of run people through some sort of time-based event. And you can embed them right on your website, or you can pop out a link that goes directly to it. The other one, which I like even more, is called Storymap.js. And this is even easier to use. This has a GUI where you just put in your Google account and it'll let you create these slides just through like a form. Here's an example of a story map that I made using some of the same stuff. So this is making of the pandemic, the early spread of COVID-19 across the world. And this does the same thing, but instead of putting your slides on a timeline, it puts them on a map, and just lets you like scroll through sort of in a geographical way through different news events. And again, you could make one of these in 20 or 30 minutes and embed it right on your website. It's just a really, really easy way to create some really nice looking graphics. So Night Lab, it's a project out of Northwestern, and they have a number of great tools. Let's see if I can find them. So in addition to Storymap and Timeline, they have this one called Juxtapose, lets you do these sort of before-after images, and SoundSite that lets you embed audio right inside stories. And again, this is stuff that we used to spend a lot of time in the newsroom, like trying to write custom JavaScript to do, and Night just created some nice tools and shared them with everybody for so everybody can do it. So it looks like I'm right at my time limit. So that's what I got. I'm happy to take any other questions if you got them.
Any questions for Adam? I'll take your spotlight off, Adam, so it's not so bold.
Adam, those timeline tools you showed, it generates the embeddable code for you to put into the HTML?
Yes. Oh yeah, yep, exactly, Chris. I'm sorry. Yep, exactly. You can, it gives you an embed code. I'm just going to repeat exactly what you just said. Yes, it gives you an embed code that you put right into the HTML. Yep, exactly.
Thank you.
Sure.
This was great, by the way.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Terrific. All right. And I feel like you have Adam's contact information, but Adam, if you would just provide your email address or a way to get in touch if people run into the rails and need your help.
Yes.
How do they reach? All right. That's Adam at adammarton.com, marton.com. And
that's me on Twitter. So yeah, I'm happy to answer any questions. And any of you guys that are Merrill students, please, well, you guys know me, but come see me anytime. Definitely.
Terrific. Well, thank you so much for joining us today, and thank you all for coming. I do want to plug our next session in the series, which is going to be about objectivity and reporting. That's organized by Larry at the Delaware Community Foundation. But Daniel Oyefuzzi and Mike Preston from the Baltimore Sun are going to be speaking next Wednesday, June 30th, 9:30 to 10:15 or so. And they're going to talk about how to kind of overcome your own urges to be like rooting for the home team when you're a sports reporter, or like how to step outside of your own proclivities in reporting, which can be a challenge for everyone because you're real people. So we have that. And then coming up July 6th, covering the Black community, we're going to have a consortium of our Black-owned newspapers discuss how to cover the Black community. And then July 14th, effective interviewing with Andy West of the Delaware State News, our own Tom Linthicum, and Larry Nagengast. So that will be exciting. All our sessions are free. They're open to everyone. So spread the word, and thank you for joining us today.